at some point during our panel, so thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And last but not least, of course, we have Matt Boyle here, who's the Washington political editor for Breitbart News Network. Matt, thank you for being with us as well.
Pleasure to be here.
So we know there's a lot of interest in news and in the news media, so it's always fun to get members of the media to critique ourselves as well. So I thought instead of opening statements, because those tend to be burdensome and take up a lot of time, feel free to mix in your experience with some of your answers. So the first question is going to go to all three of you. It's a very open-ended question, or a very simple question, is let's give your grade to the media, A through F, right now. Ralph, we'll begin with you. How do you grade the media right now?
How do I grade it?
How do you grade it?
Pretty low. Somewhere in the D- level.
Somewhere in the D-.
The big problem with journalism is, do you just want a grade or you want a discussion?
We'll do the grade and then we'll follow it by this discussion. Amber?
I would also give it a D.
Low grades?
I'm going to go even lower. It's an F, complete zero.
Complete zero.
Yeah.
Don't even show up for assignments?
Well, the entire fake news establishment media is broken. They lie. The narratives that they push are designed to hurt the president and his supporters. They won't cover stories that are good for the president and his supporters. They're committed to their fake news agenda.
And before we get too deep into that, let's talk about how we got to where we are. Ralph, we're going to begin with you. You know, you've been in the business for quite a long time now, when it was 70 just 70 years.
69 and a half.
So a few years of experience. Why don't you talk us through kind of what you've seen in the evolution of news, beginning when print dominated, print literally actually printing copies of paper.
That's going too far back. I don't remember
to broadcast coming in, and then to the digital age. Kind of just walk us through, how did we get here?
I got here because I went to 3 graduate schools, couldn't figure out what the hell I wanted to do, decided that news and informing people was the most important thing and the thing that I could do best. And so I went into it. And when I went into it, I thought of going into a kind of a new secular religious something. I thought of journalism as secular religion. The idea was to find the truth no matter what it took and present it as accurately as I could under the circumstances. There are always circumstances. You're always proscribed. You're hemmed in by what's available to you in the way of time and people you can talk with. Given that, telling the truth was the most important thing. When I got to Washington, I found, from Chicago and Pittsburgh before that, I found that people were writing about what other people said without naming those other people. They were called sources, unnamed sources. So I could say something about you that was really terrible and say you did something, and you would know who said that. And the reporter would let me do that. So you couldn't be confronted by your accuser. Well, that's certainly not the American way, and it wasn't the way of journalism as I understood the Fourth Estate. That's my biggest, it remains my biggest beef. When I first got to Washington, I said, I'm not going to do that. If you talk to me, you pick up the phone and call me, or you bump into me, and you have some information, you better be ready to go on the record. Use your name. Let me use your name, or I'm not going to use it. You can't last in this town that way because your employer expects product. If nobody's going to go on the record, what the hell are you going to say? Nothing. You have nothing to report. So it's tough. That stubbornness gave way to my making somewhat of an accommodation. And so I do stories partially based on anonymous sources, although I try never to say, to quote an anonymous source. I make it as part of the information in the story, because the source that I'm quoting in my mind, I trust. And if you've been in this business for a while, you can tell who are trustworthy sources and who are full of feces. And the people who are full of feces, the only thing they fear, especially for me, is that I will burn them. If you tell me something that's not true, and I use it without your name, but it turns out to be a lie, I will go after you. I will tell the world that you're the one that told me this. That's the only defense I have. other than that, journalism is it's not reporting the truth to you, generally speaking, in this early part of the 21st century, and it wasn't in the latter part of the last century either. It's telling you what the reporter or his editors or the owner of his newspaper or television station or network really feels about something. Well, we don't really want if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. I'll say, what's your opinion? But when you try to present facts to me, try to present your view as facts, that line has to be drawn, and I'm waiting.
For a story that was based on a single anonymous source. We now know that Lanny Davis was that anonymous source. We know that the entire story was false. CNN refuses to correct the story to this day. They refuse to reprimand Carl Bernstein for it. Carl Bernstein, by the way, was a fantastic journalist back in his day, back when he worked with Bob Woodward on Watergate, and my hat's off to them for the reporting that they did on Watergate. But the fact of the matter is that at the core of these media outlets, and I'm pleased to announce the New York Times is here covering our panel, which we really appreciate. Their media reporter is in the audience. But the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, all of these different media outlets are built on a lie. This lie is what I call the objectivity lie. They claim to their audiences that that their reporters and editors do not have personal beliefs. And I'm of the belief that, and this is why I give the media a 0 grade, the reason why I say they don't even get 1%, they're a complete fail, is because of the fact that they are built on this lie. If they were just honest with every single decision that we make in a media environment, from which stories we cover to which ones we don't, to who we interview for them, to who we don't interview, to what we put in the headline, to what we use in a story, to what we don't use in a story. All of those decisions in an editorial capacity are influenced by our personal beliefs and our opinions, and the idea that we're somehow kind of robotic and don't have personal experiences and beliefs is just not true. All of us do. So the way we approach it from Breitbart, and there are some other new media outlets out there on the left and on the right that approach it this way as well, is why not just be honest with your audience about what it is that what belief system you come from. And that's the problem with our friends like at the New York Times and like at CNN and the Washington Post, is that they claim to be objective. If they were just honest with their audience about what it is that they personally believe, their reporters and editors, maybe they could start gaining some trust.
Amen.
And so, Amber, let's just jump you in on this conversation here. Do you think the media or members of the media or outlets can be unbiased? Is that possible?
I don't think it's possible for a human being to be unbiased. And Matt hit on this perfectly. We're not robots. We all come from a belief system. We all have lived experiences that influence the way that we cover stories, the way that we frame them, the headlines that we write, what stories we choose to cover. Those are all decisions that we make based on who we are as individuals. And this is part of the reason why when the president attacks the media, the hatred that you see from his base of the media is directed largely at CNN. It's not at MSNBC. People hate CNN a million times more than they hate MSNBC. And it's because when they watch MSNBC, they understand what they're getting. They're getting a left-leaning news outlet, or if you want to call it that, of reporters reporters who are coming from a leftist slant and are covering the news that way and being honest about who they are. But then you watch CNN and you have Jim Sciutto, who is a former Obama administration official, who is trying to tell his audience that he's objective. Nobody in their right mind believes that. No rational person watches CNN and says, you know what, yes, they're objective. No, they believe that these people are lying to them about their intentions, about their beliefs, and lying to them about the stories that they're covering.
And you both had mentioned CNN, especially at the last answer there. I just bring them up because they've recently hired several conservatives and people from conservative outlets into their news team. Several from the Weekly Standard, Sarah Isgas-Flores, former DOJ spokesperson, and there was a lot of anger, I guess.
That isn't going to fix the problem.
Do you think that helps?
It's saying that you've hired a conservative because that conservative was writing for the Weekly Standard doesn't sit well with me. There's nothing conservative about the Weekly Standard.
That is also true. That is also very true. They were never Trump. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who want to see America intervene everywhere and anywhere at any time, 24/7, around the world, because they believe, they explicitly say that we are now the last surviving superpower and we are basically good, so we should practice imperialism because it will be a good kind of imperialism. This is insanity. This has nothing to do with what conservatives ever believe, ever, any real conservative.
Yeah, and I would just add that being never Trump is just insane. It's being pro-Hillary. If you were never Trump during the 2016 campaign, the only other alternative in the general election was Hillary Clinton. And so for them being never Trump, that doesn't make them conservative.
Right. You couldn't possibly be conservative and say, well, I'd rather vote for Trump. For
Hillary.
Clinton. I mean, it's just,
it doesn't make any sense.
And in terms of the criticism of these outlets for hiring conservatives from the left, it just shows what a large bubble there is in the media right now, that people who watch CNN, people who read outlets, that they hire one conservative and all of a sudden the world is ending. The fact that one or two conservatives could shift an outlet's editorial stance enough to anger leftists is just stunning to me because it's so fundamentally false.
So what I'm taking from the three of your answers is adding conservatives into mainstream newsrooms is not really helping expand the media and making it less biased.
Even worse, some of them are not really conservatives. They're being billed, so that's even worse. Because the people who are watching don't get the difference. They don't understand.
Look at
in the case of the Sarah Isgas-Flores, right, the DOJ spokeswoman who got the job at the Justice Department, how do you go from being the Justice Department spokeswoman to being a CNN political editor? I don't know how you go from one job to the other. She must have been a really good source for CNN, and I'm curious as to that. And the question really becomes, and I've asked her these questions, and she refuses to answer. And I hope she will come clean and be honest, and I hope CNN will come clean. I've asked them as well whether or not she provided any information related to the Robert Mueller probe or any other insider Justice Department information to CNN. But how you get a plum job like that at CNN is pretty interesting to me. But again, I would question the conservative bona fides of these people.
She was a campaign operative, by the way, for a Republican candidate, a woman. I won't say who.
Right.
So to bring things back to the media discussion, so do you all think, what is a better way to get the conservative voice out into the media? Is it to have an alternate form of media, right-leaning media, conservative media, alternate media, whatever you want to call it? Is that the answer?
We're the answer. Us three here, the Washington Times, Daily Caller, Breitbart, new media outlets is the answer to this. These other places are so institutionally broken. They're built on lies. As I laid out the objectivity lie, there's other lies that they're built on as well. But they're broken to the point where, and by the way, just to be fair to them, there are decent people who work at the Washington Times and CNN and the New York Times and so on and so forth. But the problem is that the occasional good story, that they do, the occasional accurate thing that they do, doesn't change the institutional flaws that they're built on. And so the answer is to build new institutions to replace replace them. And that's what's happening. And the reason
Matthew,
why
you don't believe that's an answer. Surely. These people have an exclusive franchise on the eyes and ears of 330 million people. What do we reach? I mean, realistically, we reach 1/100th of that. So people are getting their information from people we would regard as our enemies, philosophically, ideologically, politically. So it's no contest. We inform the handful of people in this room and the 10,000 attending this conference. It's a nation of 330 million people. I mean, my God, that is not balance.
The traffic numbers for Breitbart, though, we're up in the tens of millions every month in terms of unique visitors to our website. And the reason for that is because I think people are slowly but surely turning away from these established media outlets. I used to work at the Daily Caller before I worked at Breitbart, and I know the traffic numbers there are up as well. And the point is that I think that people are turning away from those other places, and part of that is technology as well. So as these establishment media outlets continue to fall and they have layoffs, and by the way, Breitbart's hiring, so unlike the New York Times and all these other outlets, the establishment media outlets out there you're seeing layoffs across the industry. But the point is that
how many people do you have in your Afghanistan bureau?
In our Afghanistan bureau, no, we've had reporters go to Afghanistan, but the point is we're a smaller outlet than they are, right? Like there's no doubt about that, but we're growing, and that's the point.
When people look for the news, what's happening around the world, they turn to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. They don't turn to us because we're not there. We just can't afford to be. Not even close.
But we're getting there.
The demand is shifting, to be sure.
So I think something that I've seen, one of the questions we ask our students is, how do you consume your news? Where do you go? And we're seeing a lot of young people who get it from left, they get it from right, they get it from perceived center, and they're going after multiple perspectives, knowing, okay, they're coming from a right point of view, they're coming from a left point of view. So would you put the burden onto the consumer?
I think the burden is on those of us who work in media, no matter what our political views are. I think we should be open and honest with our audience. And by the way, I think that there are people at, for instance, The Intercept, which is a publication on the left, that are doing great work, and they're honest with their audience. They're open and honest about the fact that they're hard, crazy left-wingers, and we don't agree with them on much. But the point is that they're at least honest. And I think that's it. The burden is on us in the media. It's not on the consumer, it's on the producer.
In today's media environment, though, and as a consumer of media myself, obviously, as all of us are, I have the same approach where I read absolutely everything, and I do read the same story from multiple different outlets to see what angle that they're covering it from and what certain tidbits of information are left out at different outlets. Because you'll see, for example, a piece in the Washington Post about the death of a child in the custody of Border Patrol that doesn't really mention that apparently she had not had anything to eat or drink in 12 hours before she was captured, and then you read the same story in the Daily Caller, and we provide the reader with that information. So every person should be looking to as many sources as possible to inform themselves when they're reading the news. And
Amber, I'm going to start with you on this question. Let's just talk about the platform, the changes in the platform. We started off talking to Ralph a little bit about it used to be, the big guys in print, and that was it, and then some of your major broadcast networks. But now there are alternatives, sources, partly just because digital is available.
Right.
So talk about some of the good things and the bad things with digital journalism, because surely it's both.
Right. I think the positives of digital journalism is that people obviously can get their news a lot more quickly, and it opens up a space for alternative media outlets like Breitbart and the Daily Caller and the Times to some extent. You guys are a little bit older than us, but it gives us the opportunity to operate in the digital space as opposed to the more costly area of print or broadcast or cable television. The bars for getting into that level of industry is much higher. The cons obviously would be that because journalism is operating at such a more quicker pace, that it leaves more room for people to make mistakes because they're trying to be first rather than being right.
Right. And that's a big problem. The mistakes in journalism. I mean, when I came into the business in 1964, there was a 1964. Look it up. You just didn't make mistakes. I mean, you were out of the newsroom forever. That's it. You did not. It was up to you to get it right. It wasn't anybody else's responsibility but the reporter. Yeah, you went through a lot of checks after that. But if the reporter originally made the mistake, he got it up the you know what, which is appropriate. It has to be that way. And now there is no penalty for being wrong. There is no penalty for being sloppy. There is no penalty for misinforming the American public. And, by the way, the legislators, federal and state, where do you think they get their information? They don't get it from God. They get it from people like me, from newsmen and women. And when we screw it up, or we don't really care what's truth and what's opinion, then we all suffer even more than we normally suffered under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, come to think of it. Oh, well.
And you talked about that, and to be fair, a lot of places do issue retractions, and they make corrections, but I think the big picture is once a story is out there, it's even if it's corrected, who notices the corrections?
Yeah, stories aren't correct.
So I think it's a little, we just have to be clear that
you lead the news with a big story,
only if
and then somebody whispers, oh, we got that wrong, by the way.
And that's true, and I think that's the problem, is not necessarily that the corrections aren't issued, but they don't hold as much weight.
The damage is already done, and when you look at Twitter is a great example for looking at the attention that initial story gets as opposed to the retraction, because you'll notice these initial bombshell reports on the Mueller probe, for example, will have tens of thousands of retweets, and then you look at the retraction that is a little response to the original tweet that they left up, they didn't even delete it, and it has maybe 10 likes.
And I think that's another thing with social media, so let's pivot to that, is that you don't always have reporters running the social media accounts. And so sometimes things can get missed by a desk assistant or someone who's working on the digital desk, but it still affects the credibility of the outlet as well. And Matt, let's go ahead and ask you here, do you think social media helps or hurts with media's reporting?
That's a complicated, tricky question. So I think it changed the industry in a significant way, in that, and Ralph would know this, there used to be like a deadline for print late at night, and then you get your story in, and it would go through multiple edits, and then it would come out in the paper in the morning. Now, it's how fast you can tweet whatever you've got, and so what happens is we'll see this happen whenever anything's going on with Trump or any kind of news item or whatever out there, is that people are racing throughout the media industry, racing to get it out on Twitter first. I personally decided a few years ago that I'm not going to tweet anymore, and I haven't tweeted since 2016 or 17, something like that. And so, but the reason for that.
Change your mind, please. We need you.
No. I think the platform is broken. I really do. I think it's.
Don't go with it until you know it's true.
No, but that's the thing, is that the way I see it is that I'll do that in a column or a story on Breitbart, and so because I don't want to feed that broken platform. But ultimately, I think that it's just changed the industry, because there's some places where it's better, right? Like, so if there's news that is just factual stuff that's coming out, and then they aren't shading it a certain way, then it's great that people are getting it faster than before. But at the same time, it's a slippery slope from that to the dishonesty. So I just think it's changed the industry.
Social media is also really dangerous because it allows people to operate in these really small sentences and sound bites. For example, the Covington Catholic kids story, that was a short, 30-second video that was posted on Twitter.
Deceptively edited.
It was edited to show only the part that made the person in the Make America Great Again hat look bad, a teenager no less. And that video, the edited one, was shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media. It was viewed by millions of people, and it wasn't until much later that we were able to get the full video and give people an account of what really happened.
That's why you can't surrender.
Hey, I'm on Twitter.
Okay.
And, Ralph, being as you initially would write your pieces and there was no social media to promote it, do you think it helps? I mean, it certainly gains more attention.
Oh, yeah.
It's gained interest. I mean, isn't that a good thing that people are interested in the news?
Yeah. So I see social media as the further democratization in that special sense conservatives understand. Democracy. This is a republic, not a democracy. It was never intended to be. But yeah, I mean, I am so pleased. Who in this room is not pleased to see the President of the United States go over the heads of the world and talk to you directly on Twitter. I mean, it is such a privilege. Doesn't make any difference whether you agree with them or disagree with them or like this tweet, don't like that. He's talking to you directly. Nobody is getting in the way. I mean, what a privilege. Nobody argues with that. See?
So let's circle back to the title of this panel, and I was chatting with you guys a little bit about this briefly, but is the culture of clickbait. Can journalism be saved? I think there's two questions there. Let's attack the first one, the culture of clickbait. Obviously, you want people to click on your stories and you want spicy headlines. And Amber, I'm going to ask you this first just because we talked about this, first of all. But the Daily Caller has been accused of clickbait. But you had a really interesting response to me. So
yeah, well, I think people fundamentally misunderstand what clickbait is. Just because a headline is interesting and that you want to click on it doesn't mean that it's clickbait as long as the story pays off. If the story that you click on, if the content matches the headline and you were interested by it, then that's not clickbait. Clickbait is when you are basically misled into clicking on a story that doesn't live up to the hype of the headline. Right,
yeah, if headlines are accurate, there's nothing wrong with writing a creative and interesting headline. We see them all the time, and our friends like the New York Times and CNN and all these other places use interesting, creative headlines. Why shouldn't we, right? Like, as long as it's accurate, and there's nothing wrong with that. And
I think the New York Times has a problem with that. Its clickbait is often misleading.
Yes, that is true.
You go to the headline in the paper, it has nothing to do with what got you in to begin with. And it's aimed at you-know-whom, not us. But we can't stay away from it. We're like insects in a flame. We go to the awful stuff about conservatives because we want to know, what are they saying about us? Or maybe it's true, because once in a while it is true.
Conservatives are pouncing, you see.
Yes.
And the second half of that question was, can journalism be saved? Ralph, we'll start with you there. Does it need to be saved, and can it be saved?
Yeah, of course it needs to be saved. You can't. This republic cannot function without two things: information for people to make decisions, and two, a moral base for the people who make up the voters and the population in general have to have some kind of moral ground on which they walk, on which they function. And, well, that's just, I think everybody agrees with that. It can't just be a neutral, all values are equal society, the United States of America. That's not the republic that the founders gave us. They really consciously thought this through and said, yeah, we want to base it on truth and people participating, but they have to have a moral grounding. They have to have something in their head that says this is right and this is wrong. And it gets interesting after that. But go ahead. I don't want to.
I would just say that in response to both of those questions, can it be saved? Only if these media outlets, these establishment media outlets like the Times, like CNN, like the Washington Post, admit that they're built on that lie, that objectivity lie, and they're willing to start being open and honest with their audience. Otherwise, if President Trump ever cured cancer or something, the CNN headline would be Trump puts doctors out of business, or if he walked on water, he fails to swim. But the point is that these media outlets are going to continue we're on this path for a long time. We're in information warfare for a long time. So can it be saved? Maybe, hopefully, I don't know. But right now, no.
I'd like to put a positive spin on it because in the Trump area, I think some of us have been very lucky because the media's bias has been so much more apparent, and they've been so much more out in the open in it that it's so much easier for us to call it out. In the past, I think it was a bit more insidious. They were kind of subtle about it in some ways, but during the 2016 election, it became so very clear that it really opened the door for conservatives, for alternative media outlets to provide that unique perspective that was so desperately missing in the establishment media, and that's our role to play. Our role is to come in and be the truth tellers that have been missing and to be honest about who we are.
Yep. Yeah.
And you all kind of hit on bias there, so let's kind of take the direction of the conversation there. Gallup and Knight Foundation survey found that Americans think most of the news they consume is inaccurate and biased. That's 62%. There was also a poll that kind of looked at who is the most biased outlets and who are the least biased outlets, and the most two were labeled as Fox and Breitbart, and the least two were labeled as PBS and the Associated Press as the least biased. Do you agree with that? Are you surprised to hear that?
Well, I would say that the reason why people recognize that we're being honest with our audience, right?
So
we're being open and honest about what biases we have, right? I think that's a good thing. I think the New York Times should do the same thing. Come on, stand up, say you're a liberal. Just admit it. And so should CNN. So should the rest of them. They should all just come out and admit it and be open and honest. The Intercept is openly liberal, so Breitbart is openly conservative. I think that's a good thing.
So it's not, that's not a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. No, I think the question is do people trust the authenticity of what you're providing, right? And I would argue that, yeah, with Breitbart, they do. I mean, there's a huge portion of the country. I mean, again, we're talking about tens of millions of people that come to Breitbart every month that refuse to read the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN or these other outlets because they don't trust them. And they come to Breitbart because they know where we're coming from and we're honest about it. And if we believe a certain thing, they know what we believe when we go into reporting on a story. That doesn't mean we can't also provide accurate information.
And this may go hand in hand, but this is something that we talk to young journalists about a bit, is can you be an activist and a journalist?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think all journalists are activists. I think so. I think we're out there fighting to get true information out to the public the best that we can. We're trying to hold corrupt officials accountable. I mean, by the way, some of the best stories that we've done at Breitbart have held Republicans accountable. We're not just going after Democrats. We're not just going after the media. And I think that we are activists.
Matt, when do you draw the line, though? I mean, if truth that you're going to report really undermines your activism, then don't you feel that gets in the way a little bit?
I think we're activists in that we oppose corruption in government. We oppose dishonesty, lack of transparency, and that's one thing that kind of unites a lot of us across the media. I think that one of the things that, like I said, there are decent people that work throughout these establishment media outlets who are good folks, and they feel that way too. But
they will not hold their jobs long if they don't toe the line of the owner or the editor or the assignments editor. They're not free agents.
Right.
And so it's up to us, and our problem remains, I consider myself an activist on the right, and it hurts me when I have to report the truth that undermines what I'm trying to accomplish.
Right, same here. But I'm not going to not hold the Republican accountable just because they're a Republican or just because they're a conservative. And that's, we've faced many stories like that over the many years that I've been at Breitbart, and it's tough, but you have to do it. You have to hold these people accountable. And there's tons of different examples.
Don't you fear losing audience, your audience? Breitbart's audience. If you
we notice our audience grows.
Nonsense. Aren't you going to?
No, but we're not talking left-wing nonsense. Oh. We're being open and honest with our audience when Republicans.
Do audiences want openness and honesty, or do they want to hear what they want to hear?
No, honesty. That's what we get it from Breitbart. Nowhere else. Maybe David Pollard. No, we want honesty.
See, there you go. You heard it right from the audience, right? Like that's what they want.
So moving the conversation, unless Amber, you wanted to jump in there with anything else. So what is the? Excuse me, just one second. Thank you. So what do you think about the rise of conservative media? Because we're talking about it, about activism, not activism, and a debate of what your activism is for. I think that was kind of what some of your point was, as an activism for the truth. Is that?
Yeah, for truth, accountability, holding, again, corrupt government officials, people who lie throughout the media, accountable for their actions, reporting, getting stories out there that other people are not reporting. Amber mentioned the stories about the Border Patrol agents and the children who've died there. I mean, again, the rest of the media is one of the big stories, or biggest areas that a lot of us go after is reporting stories that the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN would ignore. They wouldn't report otherwise, and a lot of that has to do with immigration. So a really really good example of this is the angel moms. The rest of the media ignores the angel moms. They refuse to discuss, these are people who have lost loved ones, family members, children, parents, siblings, due to crimes committed by illegal aliens. Now, everybody will say, so you'll hear the establishment media or CNN panelists will push back and say, well, the crime among the immigrant community is less than the crime among the native-born population. Well, the crime rate among the immigrant community should be 0 because we get to pick who comes into our country. There should not be any crimes committed by illegal aliens, and those people would be alive today if we enforced our immigration laws. And so each one of these stories, they ignore them. So the angel moms have been dying to get a meeting with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. They've gone to her office multiple times over the course of the whole immigration debate. And again, I don't see these stories. To his credit, Jim Acosta did actually have one of the angel moms on for about 10 seconds at the White House, but it was only after they confronted him live at a press conference with the president. But to his credit, he did have her on, so I'll give him a little bit of credit there. But the fact of the matter is CNN ignored the angel moms for the entire immigration debate up until that point. We're here to cover those stories.
And I think what we're doing here is also critiquing the media as well, and self-critique, because you're all members of the media. Amber, as a former media editor, why is it important to have these conversations to critique the industry that you're a part of?
Yeah, well, if we don't have self-reflection, how are we ever going to improve? The only way that the media can expect to be honest with the American people is if they have self-reflection and are honest about the mistakes that they've made. And unfortunately, a lot of these fake news stories either go uncorrected or inquiries from myself and other conservative media journalists are ignored. Matt mentioned the CNN Trump Tower story. That's such a huge bombshell that was later found to be completely inaccurate per Michael Cohen's testimony to Congress yesterday. And yet that story remains uncorrected. And in fact, CNN even quadrupled down on it. They didn't just double or triple down. They literally quadrupled down on that story. So this is an environment that we're in where instead of acknowledging their mistakes, apologizing for them, and then trying to do better in the future, too many people in the media choose to try to insulate themselves from criticism, and they stay in this bubble where everything that they say is the truth, and everyone who pushes back on them is some crazy right-wing activist.
What makes them? They're bad people. Were they born bad? Or, I mean, why do people in our business, our craft, do what you just said?
It's the egos. They don't want to admit that they're wrong, and I understand that. That's a human characteristic, having an ego. Well, it doesn't feel good to have to acknowledge that you made a mistake.
But people can do nice ego work or bad ego work. I mean, they're responding to a system of incentives and disincentives.
That's also true.
It's a market system. So, I mean, isn't the answer somehow finding the right incentives to get people in our racket to do the right thing, to make it worth their while, serve their egos, serve their family's dining room table, to tell the truth, really go after the truth, and maybe even get to a point where it's exciting.
Right.
We're finding uncovering the truth makes your day, even if you don't make a penny more doing it.
And one of the disincentives would obviously be to hold the media accountable when they make these mistakes, instead of letting these people continue to report the same stories out over and over again with no sense of acknowledging to the American people what they did wrong.
A good example of this is the comparison between the way CNN handled this whole Carl Bernstein, Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen fake news story and the way they handled the Anthony Scaramucci fake news story the year before. And so to their credit, now CNN still hasn't been actually transparent about everything that happened on that story, and they continue to refuse to answer questions. And don't just take my word for it, take the fake news Washington Post's word for it. Paul Fahey, their media reporter, actually did this big story about how they still refuse to be open and honest about that. But they did. There were resignations of 3 senior CNN officials. There was a retraction of the article, and they did it only under significant pressure from those of us in the new media industry, because we went up with this big story the night that they went out with the original Scaramucci story about how it was untrue, because we'd done our own reporting on it, and we were like, this is not accurate. And we talked to people throughout the administration. We had our own sources. We knew it wasn't true, and then CNN under pressure, CNN, but they tried to do it in a stealthy way. So, and there were a lot of questions about it. But again, the contrast.
Why did they do it at all? Why at all? Because
they came under pressure. Because they had to. They didn't have a choice. They were under significant pressure. They couldn't stand by their story. Again, that's the only way. The only language that these people are going to understand is we have to fight fire with fire. So that's our role out here, I think. So we have to fight these people. We have to hold them accountable.
And Ralph, trust in media was significantly higher when the question was first asked in the 70s. I believe it was the late 70s. But now it has slipped significantly. So is this, always we get this feeling, this is the worst it's ever been on insert whatever the issue is. It's never been like this before. But is there a time that you can remember that there's been this much ire and anger with the media?
Not that I can remember personally, but I do remember that after the founders got through founding the Republic, they became politicians. These wonderful human beings, these geniuses, these people who understood the foibles of human nature and tried to construct a system of balances and a way to avoid all the bad things that human beings are wont to do. When they became politicians, they started doing exactly the same thing. And they knew they were going to be that way. So what's the question?
So can you remember, is it as bad as ever and feels like it is in the frustration on this stage?
It was, in the sense, I remember because I read how bad it was right after the founding of the Republic. So, yes, it has been as bad. But this time it's different. This time there are more things at stake. Every time the United States of America, for example, screws up, we put the world at risk. Not only us, but the rest of the world. And because of our leadership, because we are the sole superpower on the planet, what we do matters a whole lot more than it ever has in the past. And when we get it wrong because we have lousy information, did that happen recently? Did that happen? Or why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we in Iraq? Why are we in Syria? Because of bad information. Why were we in Vietnam? Bad information. Who presented that information? I didn't. But the media were part of it, were they not? Am I right?
Yep.
So we're kind of on the end tail half of the panel here. So to wrap things up, I wanted to give you each an opportunity to talk about what improvements, what self-corrections can we do, the media, but what can people who provide information to the public do? What can we do to make this better?
I would just say we have to redouble and triple our efforts to be accurate. I know that we have done that at Breitbart. We've been, if you read our site, I mean, yes, we have some pretty hard-hitting headlines, but our reporting and our stories are pretty solid. We take a lot of time, a lot of effort. There's a lot of editorial review that goes into these stories. We don't rush things out. I think that it's important that we kind of calm down and would much rather be right than first, and that's kind of an approach that we take to the news. So we, if the New York Times or Politico or CNN or the Washington Post or one of these outlets beats us to a story, so be it. But I'd rather be right than rush it out. I don't think that those outlets and others approach it that way. So I hope that they will. And again, I think the most important thing is that going after that objectivity lie that these outlets are fundamentally built on. I think that they need to be honest with their audiences. They need to step forward, and I know it's tough, but and many of them would lose their jobs if they did it. But the point is that if enough of them came forward and actually were honest and open with their audiences about what it is that they personally believe when they are reporting a story, then we could get back to a place where we have trust in media again. But until that day where the New York Times' reporters and the Washington Post's reporters and the Associated Press reporters and so on and so forth are honest about what it is that they believe, we will be in this information.
You agree they're not going to be honest unless they're the owners of their news organizations want them to change.
Right.
Because
they're institutionally built this way, and they're from the top down, right? And again, like I said, there's decent people at these places, right? Like, and I know many of them, but the point is that until they decide to be open and honest, and that, again, that's going to come from the top. That's going to come from these institutions. We're not going to have.
Well,
we're going to be in this.
How do three of us, people like us, have anything to do with that? How could we possibly
have this discussion, right? Like, I think having these discussions, talking about this stuff, is important.
Bezos in the room, hold your hand up. I don't think. See,
well, we have a New York Times reporter in the room. I think we've got some other media reporters out there, and we're broadcasting this one live. And I think that having this discussion and continuing to use as many forums as we can to push these ideas forward, and again, challenge that objectivity lie every time you have an opportunity to talk to a reporter. Ask them what it is that they believe, right? Because they seem to have a lot of questions for all of us, right? Like, well, what is it that they believe, right? Let's ask them some questions, right? So if somebody's interviewing you, start asking them questions and see what happens.
Count me in, Matt.
Mm-hmm. I would encourage people, I agree with everything that Matt said, and I would also encourage people to bring skepticism back to media. We seem to be in this bizarre place where the establishment media runs stories not because the facts are there, but because they fit whatever desired narrative that they're trying to push on the American people. A perfect example of this was the Jussie Smollett hoax. You had news outlets running this uncritically. They didn't even put the word allegedly in the headline, and yet you had a video of a conservative activist from the Leadership Institute being punched in the face at a Turning Point USA event. It was caught on video, and they used the word allegedly in the headline. So there's no excuse for the way that those two stories were covered, and the reason they were covered that way is because of that inherent bias that exists within the media. So let's bring skepticism back. Let's be right, not first. Let's look at every single story that we're covering with a critical eye. And as conservative journalists, let's make sure that we're covering the stories that refuse to be covered or are being covered incorrectly by the establishment media.
Ralph, anything else on that?
Yeah, I'd say that there's in England, there's, I think at Oxford University, some years ago, there was a historian, a very famous historian. He made it a rule to open his classes by telling his students his political bias, where he stood on the political spectrum. Why did he do this? He said, I'm telling you this because I'm going to try very hard to be objective about history and give you all the information that I have. But I'm a human being, and I have my biases, and I want you to know what they are so you can judge for yourself how well I'm doing what I want to do, which is to try to be objective. If somehow we could get Jeff Bezos, I wish Jeff were here.
I do too.
Me too.
I really do too.
Yeah, if we could get some incentive, disincentive, or both, to get these folks to want to tell the truth and let
rather than cheesy
here comes
slogans.
a fresh expression, and let the chips fall where they may.
Very good.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I just wanted to close to say one thing. The survey that I've been quoting and mentioning, and one of those, it did say that people still believe that media plays an important role in the U.S. democracy and that their trust can be restored. So on that note, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.